Good morning. Again, my name is Roy Kessel from the Sports Philanthropy Network. We're excited to welcome you here today for webinar number 7. That is going to be led by Vinay Mullick from UpMetrics. So on behalf of myself, on behalf of Caleb Radham, who's our VP of Community Development and the whole Sports Philanthropy Network, we're glad that you're able to join us today. We've got a great topic ahead. I know Vinay's got some terrific information and resources that he's going to share that are available for all sports organizations through the end of the year. And UpMetrics does a terrific job. Before we turn it over to Vinay for his presentation, I just like to encourage people as much as possible. If we can keep the cameras on, I think it makes for a more interactive environment. I know sometimes people are getting up and moving around, so that's understandable. We're all working at home, so we're used to that, but it's always nice to see where people are at. We will send around a survey after the webinars to get feedback and also to get input onto other topics that you would like to see. So I encourage you to let us know what other topics are of interest and what other things you'd like to see us do. We're programming right now through the end of May because I think that's going to be the likely date that we're mostly locked up. Might go longer, but I think that that's a pretty safe expectation. And so I encourage you to look at the schedule of webinars as we were talking before we came on. The webinars that are recorded are all posted there. They're also posted through the date of our blog with the PowerPoints that people with the presenters have used, and they're also available on YouTube. Besides that, we obviously have podcasts, which we've also ramped up now to 3 times a week because there's been so much interest and demand, and people are looking for productive things to do with their time. Every Monday, it'll come out later today, we put out the weekly newsstand, which has updates on information on things that have been going on during the week, of stories from the last week and additional resources that we found from the prior week. And we developed a special COVID-19 resource page, not with any medical information, but to make sure that as we find out about webinars, other resources like UpMetrics and what they're offering and other groups that are doing things like that, we want to make those available to everybody here. And then, of course, for more regular updates, you can follow along with the information on our social media channels, on LinkedIn, on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. We're pretty easy to find. So with that, what I'd like to do just quickly, in order to give Vinay also a little bit of an understanding on who's involved and who's here, if we could just go through real quick and just run through and talk about, just introduce yourself and your organization quickly. I'll start with Kayla.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Kayla Bradham, Vice President of Community Development for the Sports Philanthropy Network, and also high school language arts teacher.
All right, Doug.
Doug Garner, I'm the Adapted Sports Director at University of Texas, Arlington.
Okay, Michelle.
Sorry, I was muted. Michelle Stroud, Director of Development for Dare to Try.
Andrea.
Hi, Program Manager for Peace Players Chicago, based in Chicago, obviously.
Becky.
Hi, Deputy Director for the Squash and Education Alliance.
Becky, are you also on a phone on a 617 number? Because there seems to be a stray number. I'm trying to find out who that is. So.
Hi there. I'm Maureen Coleman from the UpMetrics team.
Hi, Maureen. Nice to have you online.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. Lisa? Lisa must have stepped away. Alicia, are you there?
Hi, yes, I'm with Project Play Western New York. We're a nonprofit focused on helping kids be active through sports, as well as we grant out to various youth sports organizations only in Western New York.
Okay. Erica?
Hi, I'm Erica with Aerostar Avion Institute, and we teach underprivileged youth aviation. how to fly in, how to fix planes.
Fantastic. Julia? Okay, Julia will.
Sorry, I'm here. I'm just
Okay.
getting off mute. Julia Ray, I'm the Programs Director for Disabled Sports USA. We provide adaptive sports programming for people with disabilities.
Fantastic. Glad that you're with us. So now I'd like to turn it over to Vinay Mullick from UpMetrics. Vinay is the managing director there, and he's going to give us a great presentation about some of the tools that they're providing for free to organizations through the rest of the year, as well as really setting up a strong framework. Data and metrics are really the backbone of growing a nonprofit, because one of the first things that funders look at and donors look at is, what are you doing? What are you actually accomplishing? Because while it's great to talk about just a pure growth in number of participants, there's a lot more detail that's being requested now. And if you don't set up the systems from the outset, then it can often be very challenging to capture that information. So Vinay, I want to turn it over to you, and I'm gonna make sure that you can, whoops, that's not what we wanted. And we're gonna make sure that you can share the screen. Why did
Yeah.
this?
Let's see.
Is it letting you share or not yet?
No, not yet. Not yet.
Okay, there you go. Sorry. Now,
Okay.
now you should be able to share that. And if anybody else jumps on, we'll have them introduce themselves towards the end.
Great. Everyone can see that, I'm hoping? Okay, cool. All right, well, good morning. Yeah, thanks, Roy. Thanks, Kayla, for having us. I know we have a great partnership between our two groups, and excited to see you all taking the lead with providing content during, obviously during these unique times. So today we're just going to talk a little bit about what UpMetrics does. But before we get into that, really talk about how your organization can become more data-driven. And then, we kind of have some tips and tricks on how to help you do that. And near the end, we'll kind of fly into some of the things UpMetrics is doing now. A little about me, just to kind of frame my point of reference, through what you're going to hear today. I kind of have a unique journey is how I got to my current spot in working with UpMetrics. Is, I'm an engineer by degree. So some of the analytics and kind of the problem solving learned very early on in my career. Career changed and then ended up being a high school math. So Kayla, I didn't know you were a teacher as well. So we got to talk about that offline at some point. But I was a high school math teacher, then became an athletic director for about 9 years in Chicago Public Schools. So I have about 12 years of public education experience. And so that really, in that time, I really got to see data used in a lot of different ways. Sometimes I saw it used as a weapon. Sometimes, more times I saw it used as a way to leverage and raise funds and for organizations to stay more sustainable. And then that's what kind of led me to UpMetrics. So I still kind of think in terms of school years. So this is my 4th school year with UpMetrics, even though the school year is on pause. Came to UpMetrics in 2016 and have been working in the Midwest region for UpMetrics around working with organizations to become more data-driven, helping them with their data frameworks, and really, helping them use analytics to stay more sustainable and have actionable insights. So I always like to share that. So just to kind of give you a little bit of background on me. In terms of what we're jumping into today, so we're going to talk about why data is useful. And some of you on this call, I know, Andrea, you might have seen some of these slides. So if you have, maybe just bear with me a little bit. And then, the steps you can take to build a data framework. We have a 7-step sort of methodology there that we'd like to share with you. And then lastly is understand how you can leverage UpMetrics to show impact and raise funds. We're excited about some new tools we've laid out or we've released in the last few weeks in response to the COVID outbreak to really support nonprofits in raising more funds and driving impact. So big picture, when we work with groups, we see our work tied back to these sort of 7 areas or these areas of need that organizations may have as it relates to their data. So from storytelling and what are you doing, how are you doing it, and tying numbers to that, to measuring impact with impact measurement, right? Everyone on this call is definitely doing great work with the organizations that you're part of. But a lot of times we really ask ourselves, what is our impact and how can we measure that? That can be very challenging. Program design is where I've spent a lot of time, when I was on the front lines. It was, offering programming and does this programming make sense? And we need numbers to justify that. Fundraising is always a big one. Funders are getting more quantitative with their asks and wanting to know impact. And so, you can tie an impact measurement and storytelling to help you get some solid fundraising for your organization. And our new tool, we have an impact profile tool, which we'll get to at the end, that kind of connects all those for everybody. Resource allocation and learning, right? So how are you allocating staffing? If it's coaches, if it's instructors, if it's teachers, do you need 3 teachers at this session, or can you go down to 1, or do you need 30 coaches versus 10, or is it a facility question? Those are things where metrics and just simple analytics can give you insight. And then lastly, I think all of this is tied to learning, right? I mean, we're all learning and we're all getting better through these bucket areas of what your data can drive. As an organization, when we do the work that we do, and even outside of UpMetrics, if I took that hat off, you could see that the idea of analytics, impact analytics, as we like to hear a lot now, really goes back to these 4 areas. So as an organization, I would encourage you to really think about, through this presentation or later today or this week, as you're honing in on your impact and what you do, where do you land on this page right here? Some of you probably land on all 4 of these corners of access and equity, academic impact, social emotional learning, and community building. But this is just a good kind of reflection slide we like to put up and really get people thinking, because this can help you isolate what you're doing and group it to, kind of group it to a section, right? And in that section, you can really kind of hone in. And so help give you verbiage to when you speak to folks on your board, when you speak to funders, when you write grants, have a section of our impact and access and equity, or community building, or SEL, or whatever it might be. We always like to put this up there to get folks thinking and seeing what your work and your impact kind of maps to. So diving into what we're going to get into today, we're going to focus on the why, and then we're going to focus on the how. Okay, so when it comes to the why, is like, why data? So we all know we need it, but let's be really diligent about talking about the why, right? We're going to go into the power of data, how it increases investment, how it can help you develop programs, and then how it can help you drive impact. And then with the how, this is the 6-step process here of, defining your stakeholders, identifying your priorities, defining the data set and goals, how you access and prepare data, spreading the word, and then kind of review, tweak, and repeat. So we'll kind of get into both of those, why and the how. So looking at the why, we talk about increasing investment, right? So on the left-hand side here, these are some simple bar graphs. A lot of the visuals you're going to see today and some of the copy that you'll see throughout the presentation is kind of geared towards youth sports, and some of it is school-based. So don't let that turn you off in any means, but really think about how you can apply that to your situation if you're not in that setting. But just kind of looking for like what was the common denominator between a lot of groups. This is what we usually kind of land on as we put a lot of this content forward. So on the left-hand side, what you'll see is, GPA of kids in programs and kids and not in programs, and their attendance to school. So I'll tell you, being on the front lines for many, many moons, and then now being in this role where, kind of in a consultative role and a support role, when I go in and working with leaders, if it's an executive director, if it's school leaders, if it's nonprofit leaders, whatever it might be, a lot of times they say to me, hey, Vinay, these 2 graphics on the left, this is great. We've never even done this. So not to say you should stop here, but I will tell you that these 2 sort of bar graphs here definitely can tell a lot about what you're doing and how you're doing it. And just think, if a good majority of the folks that I'm working with in this role are just happy with these 2 metrics, think about if you took this to the next level, the kind of awareness and interest you can drive for the work you're doing. So on the right-hand side, you'll see here, how does it increase investment, right? It highlights the impact of offerings and budget to your stakeholders. A big thing here I always like to talk about is how it moves from the subjective to the objective. So in our organizations, no one knows your programming probably better than you, right? And that's good and bad. So when you're doing that, You know, and I'm very guilty of this at times. You know, I would have some of my key stakeholders come to me with ideas and different things, but I was so stuck and so thinking I knew everything about my organization, and I didn't have the data. And just because of time and restraint or constraints, you know, we kind of went with what I felt, right? And that isn't always the best way to build an organization. And over time, what I saw is as I had insights, a lot of times those insights backed up what I thought, but it was easier for me to communicate that to others when I could put that in numbers. So that's where the objective comes to, you know, developing empirical evidence for the outside world to see what you do every day. Excuse me. Sometimes it's hard to communicate impact. It's hard to communicate what you really do. And when you can show, hey, you know, X amount of our participants are below the poverty line. These are where we're growing those students and growing those participants with limited resources. That's a story that a lot of funders want to hear. And if you can do that in a quantitative manner, it's very impressive, and it's not the norm. So, and then lastly, stakes and budgets are too high, and folks care way too much to not have data to inform decisions, especially now, right? With the kind of the situation that we're all in. And, you know, again, kudos to Sports Philanthropy Network for being a leader and getting this content out there. But we're all on here because we're home, right? And we kind of are thinking what to do and what's next, but we also know we need to raise funds. So how are we going to do that now in a more competitive environment where our colleagues and our peers are all doing the same thing? But then, you know, kind of ask yourself, are they being as data-driven as I am or I can be, or quantitative? And I think, excuse me, that's where you can kind of maybe separate yourself from the pack and bring in more resource for what you're doing. So next is the idea of developing your programs, right? So, you know, again, thinking back to the why. So on the left here, you're going to see a fancy sort of matrix of increase and decrease of participation, attendance rates, GPA. You're going to see the name of some groups on the right and their participation. So it can look this fancy. It can look simpler. It can be an Excel sheet or a Google sheet with just numbers. I wouldn't sweat that at all. Just know that these are numbers that can help you develop your program and really help you make informed decisions. So the idea of program design, right? What are you offering and what's the frequency? So many providers, if you ask them, hey, you know, tell me about your sites. What are you delivering? How often are you delivering it? How many kids are coming? A good majority of them struggle to do that, right? And that's not good. So that's where you need to start and say, okay, what's my reach? How am I doing it? And what are my numbers? And, you know, simple Excel sheets, simple tabular setups can help you do that. And then you kind of drill in a little bit more into who are you reaching, you know, age, gender, race, zip code, school, whatever it might be, really get into who that profile is. So if we're looking at this 55 number for band, well, what does that mean, right? Are these high schoolers, these middle schoolers, are these, you know, are they post K-12, whatever they might be, really think about those metrics and really being able to tell that story. And then that ties to budget sharing, personnel, and staffing, right? So if you're looking at, you know, band is not a cheap activity to run. Let's say, band uniforms can cost anywhere up to $300, but if you got 5 kids in a band, but then you got, 39 kids in dance, and dance is a little bit cheaper, from the budget sharing and personnel staffing, now you have some insights and where should you allocate resources? And that's just kind of a simple example to talk through. We talked about this on the last slide about, moving beyond gut feeling to hunch. So again, with, that subjective to the objective, that's just another way to do that, is seeing these numbers here on the left-hand side. And then lastly, it's confirming and disproving what you're already thinking. So a lot of times, like I mentioned earlier, no one really knows our programs as well as we do because we run them. But now you do need that quantitative data to really confirm if you are on the right path, or maybe you made some wrong assumptions, and this is a great opportunity for you to dive in there and be more informed. The next part of driving impact, so what you see here on the left, in fancy terms, we like to call this survey-based analytics. So, just some survey responses here. These are just questions that are provided, in the school setting as an idea. But again, the idea of having insight to your participants, to the communities, how they feel about the programs you're doing, that's where this graphic on the left can kind of inform you. And then what that does, it enables you to act on what you discover, right? So now you have reasoning, excuse me, now you have reasoning and justification behind decisions you're going to make. and policies you might implement or you might pull back. You're going to be asking more of the right questions now because you're informed and you're educated on what's going on. And then the last two important pieces are your instructors, right, or your coaches. So a lot of times those individuals aren't with your organization every day, all day, 40 hours a week, depending on your programming model. So a lot of times there can be a disconnect between their buy-in to the mission, their understanding of the mission, their buy-in to the culture of your organization. But what you can do to bridge that gap is show them metrics, right? And show them, hey, this is the impact you're having as an instructor. This is a little bit about our community outside of what you see every day from 4 to 6 or 4 to 5:30 when you're delivering our program, or if it's on a Saturday, whatever it might be. These two bottom points right here couldn't be more important, because as frontline providers and organizations, we're always looking for ways to keep instructors, retain instructors, get high quality instructors, but also get them connected with the folks that we're working with. And data is a very good way to do that, because you can read data, you can look at metrics whenever. You don't need to be looking at them when you're delivering, but after sessions, before them, on weekends, whatever it might be. That's a great way to keep those folks connected. So now the how, right? So let's get into the nitty gritty of how we're going to implement and execute. That's always the fun part. So looking at that, so from the work that we do as a company and a lot of the partners that we've kind of garnered and worked with over the years, what we've learned is that 80% of data analysis is spent on the process of cleaning and preparing the data, right? So that's kind of the hard part, we feel, if you want to call it hard, where 20% is kind of what the first few steps are what we're going to jump into here and kind of dig in on some of that. So the step one is defining your stakeholders, right? So as you as an organization are figuring out how to become more data driven, or you want to refine your data framework, just so you can, and this is a great time to do that. Not to say all of us have tons of time on our hands and we're twiddling our thumbs, but in-person programming is obviously at a halt, and everything's virtual, right? So during this downtime, this is a good time to reflect. If you're like, hey, I'm already data driven, I'm good. That's great. Use this to refine. If you're like, I'm struggling, I need support, then this is a great way to start. And if you're in the middle, same thing. So in that process, you really have to be thoughtful and think towards of who are your stakeholders, right? And that includes participants, prospective participants. We talked about instructors. Obviously, we can't forget about our boards, leaderships, EDs, program directors, CEOs, CFOs, the community, elected officials. If you're in a community where, politics plays a big game and impacts what you're doing, your partner organizations, Sports Philanthropy Network is a great partner organization for all of us. How you all fundraise, advocacy, sponsors, and then, most importantly, don't forget about yourself, right? The work that we're doing is hard work. Sometimes it's easy to get lost and you have your head down and not take a step back and look up and say, why am I doing this? What am I doing? Why am I fundraising this? Why am I writing this grant? Why did I take a pay cut to come and start this organization, which many of us have done? So in that thinking, don't forget about you, because I've seen this data really change how organizational leaders, their outlook and their morale as to how their organization is moving forward. Because we all have those points in our careers where we're like, okay, should I be doing this? Am I doing this? Why am I doing this? And sometimes that data can reaffirm you continuing something, or maybe even you making a pivot. So that idea, again, of defining your stakeholders is extremely important. Step two, you look at your stakeholders and what is important to them. Okay, so I'm not going to go through all these questions, but as we can send out this deck later, I'll send it out to Roy. But these are questions that, as you go through the process of, if you identify if you identify this individual from the organizational staff as a key stakeholder, ask yourself these questions. So for example, looking at organizational staff is, what is the return on investment of this program? Are the programs aligned with the organization's mission? So is this program that's being implemented, does it tie well into what we're doing? Does it make sense? Are we getting participants through the door? Is it helping us raise more funds? These are questions, again, that those folks are going to ask, and you're going to have to think about how to get them data for them to support your initiative, or for them to help you pivot and think of something new. And so again, this goes down to your instructors. As important as we know our instructors are, we can never downplay. Obviously our participants are extremely important, but if we don't have solid instructors, participants aren't going to come back, right? And that's a big thing we all need to be very real about. So the idea of getting your instructors and 5-star instructors and keeping them and retaining them and recruiting them and supporting them, extremely important. So think about, how you can invest them. Down here in yellow, kind of that external part of the organizations, if it's parents, community, fundraising, sponsors, partners, thinking about that, obviously board of directors, elected officials, and advocacy groups near the bottom. So yeah, there's a lot here. I think this is something that is best digested without me speaking at you, but you looking at this slide offline and really thinking about what makes sense for you and the organizations you support. So now, you've who you're going after, their priorities, right? And now you want to define a data set and goals, okay? So example data set on your right-hand side, back to that band example, it's simple. This one right here, you're looking at 2 sort of indicators. You're looking at gender, and then you're looking at grade. So here, very simple of, what's your distribution of grade and what's your distribution of gender. And that ties back to, on the left-hand side over here, you'll see overall participation, demographics. The idea of attendance is important, right? How often are participants coming to our programs? How often do we need them there? Or how often are they coming? And then again, using that, the youth, youth serving organization, school-based, the idea of academic data where you can get that as always a good data point to include in any work you're doing. Some example goals, right? So if you go back, this slide was like the data set, and now you're looking at the goals. So again, you can apply these to your organizations. I mean, thinking of a school, it could be GPA, it could be standardized tests, the idea of participants attending 95% of all activities, and then also looking at, participant goals per different groups. So if it's grade, race, gender, for some of you on the call, let's say it's community-based, right? It's geographic-based, it's sports-based, maybe it's income-based. Those are all things that you should think about in terms of your outreach and defining these data set and goals, and then tying that data set and goals back to the mission of who you all are as an organization, but then also how that also ties into the funding you're going after. So you want to make sure your funding and what you're going after aligns to who you are, so you feel good about that, and you're not just setting goals to get, a grant from this foundation or a meeting with this philanthropist, but really tying it back to your mission so you feel really good about the work that you're doing. So step 4, there's a lot on this slide. I used to have a ton more text on this. I've learned to pull it off, and I'll talk through some of it. But if you look at the orange text here and we just kind of focus on that, is like, what are you already collecting? What do you want to start collecting? What resources can you grab to help you? And then correlate, right? So I'll dig into each one a bit more. So don't reinvent the wheel if you're already doing something. So if you're already collecting data and you're doing well, great. You might skip step 1 and step 2 and maybe even step 3, and kudos to you, right? But if you're still early on, like I mentioned, some of the scenarios previously, that's okay. So think about what is already being done. Maybe it's a registration form, maybe it's a Google form, maybe it's pen and paper. And that's okay. But know that, right? And know that, making sure that's consistent across all your sites. And if you're at 3, 4, 5, 6 sites or all your events, if you do 50 events a year, just make sure it's consistent. Make sure the entry form is consistent, or the registration form is consistent. All that data is clean across the board on the front end, because it's going to make your life easier as you kind of move forward. So always be very honest about that in terms of knowing what you're collecting. And if you're already collecting, great, just clean it up. After you do an inventory of that, talk about what you want to start collecting. And let's be realistic here, okay? Don't think you're going to collect, if these national organizations of data mining and data collection, if they're not grabbing that data, you're not going to get that data. I'm going to be very honest with you there, right? So think about what's realistic for you to grab with what's within your reach as a nonprofit organization with a limited budget. A lot of times we have organizations come to us and they want all this data, but they're not even collecting their registration data. So you getting all this outcome data from across the country is just not going to happen. And I'm just being very frank and straight up with you. So you really need to be honest about what makes sense and that you have the capacity to bring in. And you can bring in organizations like ourselves to support that, but we're also not like we don't have the golden key for getting every piece of data in the world. So you also have to be realistic with that as well. But really think about what you want to start collecting and how that ties to what you already have. And then you're going to talk about resources, right? So resources could be technology tools, right? They could be SurveyMonkey, could be Google Forms, could be Qualtrics, it could be a Google Sheet, it could be a person, right? The person could be, you have a five-person organization, you have an ED, and you have support staff, and maybe one of those support staff is very into analytics. And for starters, maybe a quarter of their job or a third of their job is data analytics as you guys ramp and grow up and raise more funds. And then hopefully you get a data analyst on staff eventually, or you can hire an organization like ours, and we would love to support you too. And we work with a lot of data analysts as well, not just organizations without data analysts. So you got to think about those resources. The resources, could be a friend who's in the metrics and they can help you do some work. But really be resourceful here, because there's a lot of supports out here. You just have to think about what makes sense for your organization and what's realistic and executionable in terms of your mind, in terms of your framework as a group. And the last part, I can't downplay this, or I can't, put more attention on this. This is super important. Too many times the groups we work with are doing a lot around spitting out outcome or output data. We serve, 3,000 participants across 40 counties in 6 states. And that's great, right? It's great to have your output data, but you need outcome data. And outcome data is where you can get into the idea of correlating. Well, because they took part in our organization, ABC organization, we saw a correlation in success with this outcome. So that's where you really need to think, back to your theory of change, back to your delivery model, your mission as an organization. Why are you doing this work? You're doing this work. You've given up your life of doing, your career for this mission-based organization because you feel folks that are taking part in your interventions are becoming better at this part of life because of participation with you, right? So that's where you correlate. Participation in organization ABC, we have seen growth in social emotional learning, in community building, in academic outcomes, in job placement, in college attendance and retention. Those are all things where you got to correlate. You're not going to solve every problem in the world through your organization, so be real about that, but really hone in on what is actionable and what's reasonable for your group to show a correlation on. And that, as an organization, back to UpMetrics, that's what we do all the time with groups, is looking for correlations. And that's probably the most enjoyable thing that we get to do as a company, is when we can bring insights to a nonprofit to say, hey, because of your intervention in your group or your organization, look at what you've done for our population that you're serving. And that's pretty neat. So I really would call to action there for you all is to really think about what correlations make sense for you all. And if you guys want to talk about that offline, you can tell I have a lot of opinions there. We can definitely do that. So we're almost done. So step 5 is now you have your data, right? You've stakeholders, their priorities, you define data set and goals, you figured out how to access and prepare data, and now you have data, okay? So now you spread the word, right? So what do you do? And this is where in my former lives, I probably could have been a little better at that. It's because I would have a lot of data and then I wouldn't know where to go with it, right? And I would look at it like, oh, this is clean, this is great, but I didn't make the time strategically initially to do what I needed to do. So in that, you want to go back and revisit your stakeholder priorities, right? Be honest to that. Think that through again. What makes sense, right? Why did you start this whole process? And then identify the venue to present your insights, okay? So what's appropriate? Is it a board meeting? Is it a staff meeting? Is it a community meeting? Is it social media, right? You really need to think that through and be strategic there, because you're going to get roasted. There will be times you will get roasted for your data. So maybe you start, safe. You start with, your colleagues. You start with another organization or with another ED that you have a good relationship. Hey, Jane, hey, John, what do you think of this data? Give me some thoughts. Then you take it to your internal team. Then you take it to your board. Then you take it to your associate board, whatever it might be, kind of think that through. Then also develop a schedule to regularly communicate. Because once you have this framework put together, you have this rich array of data, and let's say you just present it once and then you get quiet, you never present it again, you're gonna get asked questions. Hey, where is that data? How did you grow it? When are we going to see it again? Are we going to see it quarterly? Are we going to see it annually? Is it in the annual report? What are we doing? So be ready for that. And then, communicate your successes to generate continuous buy-in. So I think of this with participants and instructors and peers and funders, right? You got to continuously share that. If it's through social, email, newsletters, whatever it might be, you don't got to become, a super analytical and quantitative organization. But if you started this trend of including metrics, don't stop. Always have a little tidbit. If it's on your monthly newsletters or quarterly or social, always throw something in. And then always be prepared for it. I kind of mentioned this using the word roasted, but questions, feedback, potential backlash to justify your data and collection analysis. At the end of the day, your data is going to make your organization look good, make it look okay, might not make it look great. But tied to that are people doing that work and people funding that work. So you're going to elicit emotions in folks, and we see this every day. In one of my career stops, the first time we went data driven, the first few meetings we had looking at dashboards, people were walking out of meetings, people were crying, people were not talking because the data was highlighting gaps in their work. And it took some time to have hard conversations as to why we were doing this and what we were doing was better for the students that we were serving, right? And not to say that's going to be your organization, but you got to be sensitive to that on the front end. So on the back end, you're not causing a huge organizational sort of chaotic environment because now these numbers came out of thin air. So yeah, just kind of think all that through. Kind of closing up here, a few things. Last step. This calendar is kind of based on an academic year, right? Obviously, academic years are kind of all over the place right now, but I think if you look at the 5 main steps here of identify and analyze, kind of big picture, you want to review, tweak, and repeat your process every year. Let me take a step back. So, as you're looking at steps 1 through 5, it's not just steps 1 through 5 are going to stay there, and you're going to repeat that every year and not, revisit and fix things. So that's the big thing here is review, tweak, and repeat. We've broken that up into 5 sub-steps of identify and analyze early on. Next step is strategize, roll out and buy-in, monitor and adjust, and then evaluate. So there's a lot here. Again, this is another slide I think you need to look at without me kind of blasting at you here, and think about how that makes sense for your programming cycle. What is your programming cycle? Maybe you're January to January, maybe you're July to July, whatever it might be. Really think about what you've done to become data-driven, where you can get better, and how you can continue to grow your organization. So that would be the big takeaway from this side. Going to jump into UpMetrics real quick, and then we'll have about 15 minutes here. So this should take a few minutes, and then we'll have time for questions if that's okay with the group. So really quickly, a little background on UpMetrics and the work we do. We're a privately funded social enterprise based out of the Bay Area. Our big drive and what we do is to make the social sector more data-driven when it comes to nonprofits like all of you on this call, and also funders for those of you on this call too. Our goal is to connect the two of them around data. Our company is funded by a handful of Bay Area philanthropists that have a strong affinity to bringing data to the social sector, which is why they started this organization about 5-6 years ago to get us all moving and try to make some change in the sector. And now more than ever, as it relates to COVID and the issues that even funders are having, but nonprofits as well, we see the opportunity for us to support even greater now than it might have been a few years ago. So here's a little background. Started in 2015. Over the years, we've evolved into started off as putting a mobile app out there to support groups around that, to now present day 2019, 2020. We have an advanced analytics platform that allows for data visualization, goal setting, storytelling, and even a fundraising component to the tool where we just added. And that's kind of our focus right now. Here's our team. So the joke I always tell folks here in Chicago is, for many moons, everyone thought of Vinay as the, public education 12 years. So when I started this job, I think they all thought it was just me working in my basement, which it is not. We're a full company. We have about 25 staff members across San Francisco, Southern California, Los Angeles, San Diego, obviously here in the Midwest, in Chicago, and then in Philadelphia and then Washington, D.C. So we're working about 1,500 organizations with a strong group of funders and nonprofits that all have an affinity and an appreciation of the work that we do. So how we do it, we have two big things, right? We have an impact analytics platform. So this is a data visualization platform that has the data visualization, the goal setting, the storytelling, the fundraising. It's a very simple tool, very clean, very easy to use. And then we have our services, which you see over here. We call that our DECAL methodology, and that's the service side of the work that we do. So not only do we provide groups with a software platform, but we also provide them with the ability to get services and help through humans. So we just don't turn over the keys and give you software and call you once a year, but we're constantly in touch with you to support you through your work through our platform. So big picture, any journey with UpMetrics, we break it down into 4 steps. We have a define, collect, analyze, and leverage. And that is the services side of how we get you on our platform and breaking down that work tied to each one of these steps to components of our platform to help you still tell your story a bit better. In our platform, I'm going to highlight a few things, and I want to touch on the actual, the free platform that we've come out with in response to COVID, and hopefully some of you on the call will take advantage of that and jump on. So when you get in our platform, one of the most functional components and the biggest sides to it are the goals component. So we help you set goals to work towards something as an organization. And for example, for this use case, a goal could be become a better friend in 2020. And then tied to those goals, we do indicators, and indicators are sort of mini goals that are more quantitative and have a baseline and a target. So for example, if you're trying to become a better friend, indicators could be send 25 birthday cards, host X amount of dinner parties, and then get, send a Google survey to your friends and asking them to give you a rating, and let's say that's a 9.0. And then the idea is getting that data into the platform, right? So if you're trying to become a better friend, data that could help you do that would be, how many birthday cards did you send? How many dinner parties did you host? And then, using our data collector tool to get survey feedback, and then importing all that data into our platform. And then the last component to the platform are stories, right? So throughout most of this call, I've been talking about, quantitative. But a big part of storytelling and what funders and nonprofits need to push the needle is qualitative. So the stories component is a qualitative component of our platform that allows you to bring in stories from social media, to write your own stories, to annotate data points with, why there might be a dip in data or an increase in data or outcome or service, whatever it might be. And so that's the stories component, which if you guys ever log in the platform, you'll be able to see that. A lot of folks like that because it's a great way to tie the qualitative and the quantitative together. And then lastly, all together, back to what we talked about, you're taking your data tab, you're taking the data visualization, the goals and the stories, and that's where you'll be able to, really understand and communicate impact. And that's something you can do with our platform with the support of with the support of the team and all sorts of other resources we have. So here's what the tool looks like in high level. You see some heat mapping abilities we provide, some data visualization. Here's some of the goal setting. Just a lot of metrics. It looks more complicated than it is. I'll be very frank with you. Once you get in and do some simple things, you can start to build data visualizations for your platform or for your organization like this pretty quickly. And then one thing we've started to do, so in response to COVID, within the last 2 weeks, we've launched a component to our platform. It's called the impact profile, and that's what you see here. And so right now, we are offering a version of our platform free to all nonprofits through the end of 2020, and that's called UpMetrics Lite. So the big thing of UpMetrics Lite compared to some of the stuff I talked to you about is that it's a more self-service tool, but we have a great abundance and resource of videos and how-to tutorials on the platform to help you create a profile like this where you can talk about who you are, tied to a donation link back to your website, your social media links, who the organization is, and then putting in some simple metrics that can take you 10 minutes to do and some progress towards goal, and then tying that back to stories. So for example, I'll show you some of the, some of the impact profiles that we've done for groups here locally. So like Leo Catholic High School is a high school here in Chicago. ACE Project does tennis in Baltimore and the South Suburbs. Chicago Run, obviously it's an after-school running program and in-school running program here in Chicago. And then America Scores New York, based out of New York, soccer, poetry, leadership development. And so what we did for them, we helped create, let me get out of this real quick. Here are some of the impact profiles. I'll show you Chicago Run that we were able to create. The organization was able to create pretty quickly. So you can kind of see all of this is really easy to build in the platform. You have the ability to highlight goals. The goal that they have here is increase reach in Chicago communities. They have their indicators, increase physical activity, and they listed some stories down here. So they're now taking this URL right here, pushing it out on social, pushing it on their e-newsletters. We're doing the same thing to help support them as an organization. You'll probably see more of that later this week and the next week. And it's a really great way for groups to do those asks for funding using actual live and real metrics. And then if we go back here real quick. We'll just go here. So then, in terms of steps, looking at these, this is kind of what we're doing here. We're offering UpMetrics Lite free through the end of 2020. We have onboarding videos. You can set up goal stories in your public profile. And then we have a help center to help you go through it. And then, that's kind of the end of it. Big picture, these were kind of our goals. I don't know why these aren't presenting, so sorry about that. We went through why data is useful, how you can begin to take steps to build a framework, how UpMetrics can support that, and then encourage all of you to stay in touch. Here's my information, and then here's more information on UpMetrics if you needed that. So yeah, that's kind of all that. Sorry, I went a little longer, but excuse me, I think there was a lot there. So yeah, Ray or Roy, I'll turn it over to you if you have any more thoughts or feedback or however you want to do it.
Great. Thanks, Vinay. We appreciate all of the information. I know there's a few questions listed in the chat. Julia, do you want to jump on and ask directly? Oh, it looks like Julia's now off the call. So anyone who's still on here want to jump in with any questions, you can either put them in the chat or ask Vinay directly.
Yeah, I have a question. I'm Tamara. How you doing, Roy? How you doing, everybody?
Hey.
I hope all is well. I'm glad, and thanks, Kayla, again for reminding me about today's webinar. But I do have a question because I think this will be a great tool for my organization to utilize. And I spoke briefly. I told Kayla about what I was interested in, the area of nonprofit to expand of what I'm doing now. So currently I have a nonprofit. It's called Rock ARVO, and it's a organization to organize and mobilize millennial voters here in Little Rock, Arkansas, the state of Arkansas, and just to get them involved. However, I don't not to say how long, but we have never had like a tool to tell us like how we're doing and how we're setting goals. And I think it's just having like that guidance and advice, because I just know there was a need to like get my peers and people of my age group out to vote. And, we do a pretty good job, like you said, to become a better friend. We, host events and parties for, just to get people motivated. Like we'll say, hey, come and have, appetizer with us. And once they get there, we talk with them about, like the importance of voting and getting them, excited. And they actually, have a good interest in it. So my question is, how could, my organization structure our program, but get involved like with trying to understand the data that we would like to see in order to measure our organization to get more people to join our organization, if that makes if I'm clear, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so you're saying the question is trying to figure out how to use your existing data to get more folks involved.
Yeah, I think that's what she's looking for help on.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of going through some of these steps. And Tamara, we could talk offline too, but it's really seeing, where you're at, right, and what you have, and looking for insights in that data. If it's, if there's satisfaction, if they have, high engagement rates, and then tying that back to encouraging new folks to get out and support the mission of your organization. It sounds like it's to get more people to vote is what I took from that. So yeah, no, for sure. I mean that. So and we can send out this deck, like going through some of the steps in that deck, the 6 steps, or even going through the define, collect, analyze, and leverage, which we can guide you through. I think just going through that process will give you a lot of insights that will just help you be more informed in your work, right? I mean, it's very simple. I think a lot of times it's just reflecting, going back to me being a teacher, you just got to take time to reflect, right? You got to take time to reflect on your practice, what you're doing, what works, what doesn't, and then being really honest about that, and then putting that towards a framework, whether it's the frameworks you saw here today, or if it's another framework that you might feel is a better fit for your work. I think that's definitely something we could do, because you have data. You have some data sets.
Yes, I do have data, and it's just sometimes trying to understand the data, because last year, like for the election, we played a part in taking students to go vote for the mayoral election here. And so I set up a Google Doc, just to get the basics, their name, phone number, and email, and their age. And so what I do, I just randomly text them and, just reach out to them like, hey, how are you doing? Just to keep the conversation casual and cordial, to, stay engaged with each person who have, been a part of the organization.
Got it. Yeah, we should talk offline. I'll get your information, and then we could dive in a bit more if that works for you.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Perfect. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, and sure. I think that the thing that's important as we look at the process with what Vinay's describing as these tools, it's terrific, especially for groups that have multiple organizations that are part of their umbrella. I know, Alicia, for what you're doing out there, I think this is something that would be great for Project Play of Western New York, because you've got a few hundred organizations that are part of what you're doing, and giving them all the resources and tools that Vinay has. This is something that would help them deal with the issues we spoke about when I was out there in November, in terms of capturing data and being more prepared to develop a legacy and go and get grants, because one of the challenges many organizations have when they're going for a grant is they're writing it, as Vinay said, on sort of on that hunch and on that feeling. And you can get somewhere with that, certainly in the early stages of an organization. But as you start being around for a longer amount of time, and as you start looking for larger dollar amounts in grants and in sponsorships and other things like that, people really need to get a feel for how many results you're achieving as an organization and what the quality of those results are. And I think Vinay's graphs really did a great job showing what types of things you're able to measure. And so any last questions here before we sign off? I know we're coming up on an hour, so we want to be true to people in terms of keeping them on schedule.
I just wanted to say real quick, this is, I think, my second time, maybe even third time in this, Vinay.
Yeah, right.
I'll reach out to you, because we've had some changes in our org as far as M&E. And so, like I had mentioned before, even if we try to start this process with Chicago as a test, and see if we expand it to the rest of the organization. So I'll reach out to you. But I thought one of the most impactful things you talked about is how you can leverage the data to tell stories. And tailor that story to the different stakeholders that you're talking to. And one of the groups he had showed, in one of the talks I've been to, he showed us examples of exactly how to do that. So I'm giving you like a little plug here, but I thought that was really, really, really interesting of how you can adjust the data, how you need it, depending on the audience you're presenting to, which I thought was very, very helpful. So, you know, if you guys get a chance, really, you know, have a conversation with Vinay and let him share some of the worksheets that he showed us in one of our other presentations. So thank you. And thank you, Rory, for putting this together.
Thanks for coming on. We're glad that you were here, and want to thank everybody else on my behalf and on behalf of Kayla and the Sports Philanthropy Network. We're glad that you could join us. Vinay, thank you for a terrific presentation, and we'll get the PowerPoint and make sure that that's posted through our blog, so you'll be able to watch the video, look at the slides, or share that with other people in your organization. I know that there's a lot of people who for various reasons don't jump on during the day and go and look at those in the evenings. I encourage you again, as you get our surveys about the webinars, let us know your thoughts and what other topics you're interested in seeing. And I hope you'll join us on some of the other webinars and participate in other ways with the network. We thank you for being with us today, and stay safe, stay healthy, and we'll talk to you soon. Thank you.